Welcome to this explainer. You know, we've all been there. You're scrolling through your feed, and boom, there's this gorgeous sunset-backed image slapped with a profound philosophical quote. Or, hey, maybe you're literally drinking out of a coffee mug with one of those quotes right now. We love using these phrases to comfort ourselves, to get pumped up, or, let's be honest, sometimes just to sound a little smarter. But what if I told you we're getting them completely wrong? Today, we're going to strip away all those aesthetic filters. We're diving into the heavy, and honestly, sometimes brutally uncomfortable truths these philosophers were actually trying to tell us.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Prepare to have your comforting perceptions completely challenged. We are going to unmask the real reality behind these trendy phrases, and I promise you, the actual philosophy here is infinitely more fascinating and way more terrifying than the Instagram versions.
Let's start with an absolute classic. Hell is other people. Jean-Paul Sartre. You have definitely heard someone use this to complain about a bad boss, a terrible roommate, or just, those noisy neighbors. It kind of sounds like the ultimate anti-social anthem, right? But actually, it has absolutely nothing to do with hating the people around you. No way!
The real context comes from Sartre's 1944 play, No Exit. The setup is super simple. You've got three dead people locked in a room together for eternity. There's no fire, no demons poking them with pitchforks, but crucially, there are zero mirrors. One character realizes she desperately needs a mirror just to see herself, and without it, she's completely dependent on the eyes of the other two, just to confirm she even exists. So hell isn't the sheer annoyance of other people. Hell is the terrifying realization that your entire identity is basically held hostage by how other people perceive you.
Section 1. Hell is not your neighbor. The trap of the social web.
So how exactly does this play out for us today? Well, Sartre was essentially predicting our modern digital age decades before it even happened. I mean, think about it. When was the last time you posted a photo or even just chose an outfit without subconsciously considering how you'd be perceived? We are performing our identity 24/7. Sartre called this the gaze of the other, and it is the ultimate mechanism of social control. To really wrap our heads around this, think of the Panopticon. It was a prison designed by Jeremy Bentham back in the 18th century with a central watchtower. The trick was prisoners never knew if they were actually being watched, so they just behaved as if they always were. The philosopher Michel Foucault later came along and said, hey, this isn't just a clever prison design, this is our entire society. You really don't need physical chains when the mere possibility of being watched keeps you perfectly in line.
Sartre actually had a very specific term for how we cope with this overwhelming pressure. He called it bad faith, or mal-fait. This is basically when you pretend you don't have a choice. You play a character. You play the good employee, the perfect parent, or the cool friend. And why do we do this? Because facing the absolute dizzying freedom of being able to choose exactly who you are at any given second is simply too terrifying. It is so much easier to just surrender your identity to the crowd.
Section 2. You cannot survive alone. The biological need for the polis.
All right, so we just looked at how the gaze of others traps us. But there's this inescapable flip side to the coin. You literally cannot survive alone. We have a fundamental biological need for the collective. Aristotle summarized this perfectly when he famously said, man is a political animal. Now, keep in mind, he wasn't talking about voting or political parties here. The Greek word he used comes from polis, the city-state. The polis was the absolute basic condition of human existence. If you step outside the group, you lose your language, your morality, your very identity. As Aristotle saw it, you become either a beast or a god. You basically cease to be human.
And when we test Aristotle's theory in the real world, the results are pretty devastating. The ancient Athenians used a system called ostracism to exile people for 10 years. Removing someone from the group was literally considered a fate worse than death because it completely wiped out their identity. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and Thomas Hobbes pointed out that life without society is just nasty, brutish, and short. And what about today? Well, modern neuroscience actually proves that the human brain in solitary confinement begins to literally dismantle itself. To put that into perspective, social rejection activates the exact same neural circuits as getting physically burnt. We are biologically hardwired to need the group.
Section 3. The deadly cost of questioning, ignorance, and the banality of evil.
But here's the catch. Belonging to the group comes with a really dangerous price tag if we aren't careful. We all know Socrates' famous quote, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. It looks fantastic on a motivational poster. But Socrates was not talking about a 10-minute daily journaling habit here. In 399 BC, Socrates literally drank poison. He was condemned to death by the Athenians because he absolutely would not stop publicly humiliating powerful people by questioning their deeply held beliefs. He chose death over living an unexamined life on autopilot. Jump forward to the 1920s, and Martin Heidegger identifies what he called Thasmon, the anonymous collective they. They dress like this, they think like this. We basically outsource our choices to the crowd. And tragically, in 1961, Hannah Arendt witnessed the ultimate, horrific consequence of this at the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust. The terrifying truth, he wasn't some cartoon monster. He was just a bureaucrat living in Thasmon, entirely on autopilot, never questioning his orders. The greatest evil often comes from people who simply refuse to examine their own lives.
Section 4. The brutal reality of becoming. Stripping away the self.
Okay, so if examining your life is literally a matter of life and death, how do you actually do it? Well, Friedrich Nietzsche gave us a phrase that has been wildly romanticized: become what you are. Now, if you've seen this quote sitting next to a little fire emoji on some fitness influencer's page, you are witnessing the absolute assassination of a philosophical idea. Becoming what you are is not some cute, breezy journey of self-discovery. As Nietzsche laid it out in his book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, it's an agonizing three-step metamorphosis. Step 1. You are the camel. You're just bearing the heavy, imposed values of your family, your religion, and your culture. Step 2. You become the lion, who violently rebels and destroys those old values. But here's the thing. The lion only knows what it hates, not what it wants. Finally, Step 3. If you survive all that, you become the child, capable of creating entirely new values out of absolutely nothing. It's a violent tearing away of everything you thought you were.
And you know what? Nietzsche paid the ultimate price for this. He genuinely lived his philosophy. He faced crushing poverty, agonizing physical sickness, and brutal romantic rejection. His journey literally ended with a total mental collapse in Turin, Italy, where he tearfully hugged a beaten horse in the street and never recovered his sanity. Yet, despite all of that, he preached amor fati, loving your fate. And he meant not just the good parts, but actively embracing the pain, the failure, the madness, and the loneliness as an essential, beautiful part of who you are. It's not a life hack, guys. It is a dangerous wager with your own sanity.
Section 5. The terror of absolute freedom, designing your own purpose.
So if he somehow managed to strip away all those societal expectations, what are you actually left with? Well, you're left with the terror of absolute freedom. Let's bounce back to Jean-Paul Sartre to look at perhaps the most foundational and, terrifying concept in modern philosophy. Think of a knife. This is an analogy Sartre actually used in a packed lecture right after World War II. The idea of the knife, its essence, its purpose to cut things, existed in someone's mind way before it was ever manufactured in a factory. So for a knife, essence precedes existence. But for a human being, Sartre argued that existence precedes essence. You just show up. You are born with zero user manual, no fixed destiny, and no pre-written purpose. You exist first, and then you are forced to invent your essence through every choice you make.
And that brilliant realization leads directly to what Sartre called existential anguish. It's that dizzying, deeply terrifying feeling, what Kierkegaard called the dizziness of freedom, when it suddenly hits you that absolutely nothing is stopping you from quitting your job, leaving your town, and completely changing your entire life right this very second. We build our daily routines and habits, retreating into that bad faith we talked about earlier, precisely to construct an invented prison. It hides us from the terrifying, raw reality that we are entirely, radically free.
Section 6. The limits of our words. What we cannot say.
So let's recap for a second. We are completely free, we desperately need society, but we have to constantly question it, and we must go through the painful process of forging our own identity. That is a massive amount to process, but how do we even begin to talk about these huge concepts? Enter Ludwig Wittgenstein. In 1921, at just 32 years old, he published the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. And get this, he didn't write this in some cozy wood-paneled academic office. He wrote it while quite literally surviving artillery fire in the trenches of World War I. Amidst all that physical destruction, he concluded that language is simply a map of physical reality. A sentence only makes sense if it pictures a verifiable fact in the real world, like saying, "It is raining outside."
Now, this leads to a pretty devastating conclusion. Think about the big questions. Does God exist? What is beauty? Is there free will? What is the true meaning of life? According to Wittgenstein, all of these questions, which is basically 2,500 years of philosophy, are just meaningless linguistic noise. The logical positivists of the Vienna Circle ran with this. They took it to mean that if a statement cannot be empirically verified in a science lab, it literally means nothing at all. It's kind of like asking, hey, what does the color blue smell like?
The grammar works, sure, but it points to absolutely nothing.
The wild thing is, Wittgenstein genuinely believed he had solved all the problems of philosophy in a tiny 75-page book. So what did he do? He quit. He literally walked away from academia to become a primary school teacher in rural Austria. But years later, in this stunning display of intellectual honesty, he actually returned to Cambridge to completely refute his own book. He realized, actually, scratch that, language isn't just a strict map of facts. It's a complex, messy series of games we play depending on the context.
However, the final quote of his original book somehow survives the destruction of his own theory, and it is incredibly powerful. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Wittgenstein was basically saying that the most profound and important things in human existence, things like love, death, meaning, ethics, they simply hit a wall. Language just cannot capture them. We can only point at them, experience them, and sort of circle around them. So as you look at your own life, beneath all those comfortable routines and the social media masks, are you bravely facing the terrifying freedom of your existence, or are you just filling the silence with meaningless noise to avoid looking in the mirror? The next time you look at that inspirational coffee mug, you might just want to sit in silence instead.